The American Association of Municipal Executives launched its free job board. That's right, it's absolutely free for you to post your senior and executive level recruitments. So if you have an assistant director position and up that you're trying to fill in your organization, go to jobs.aame.org. That's jobs.aame.org to post your listing today. Again, it's absolutely free. So if you are a city manager, county manager listening to this, if you are an HR director, please share this with your professional networks, post it out on your listservs, get the word out, because we're trying to build the only job board in the nation that is exclusively focused on senior and executive level recruitments. Again, that's jobs.aame.org. Absolutely free. Post your job today. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Tim Rundel. If you do not recall, he was one of my very first guests. I think the third interview I ever did with a city manager on the podcast, episode 8, nearly 2 years ago when I was just starting my journey. And Tim, we had this conversation about your efforts to help get a sitcom called The City of Weed about a city manager off the ground, because you are the city manager, or you were the city manager in the City of Weed at the time. And we had this really hilarious conversation that covered a lot of ground. And I received so much amazing feedback, and it's still one of my favorite episodes of all time. And so I'm really excited to have you back on the show, because I literally laughed my ass off the entire time. So welcome back to the show, Tim.
It's good to be here, Joe. Really good to be here. Yeah, it was an interesting interview too, because my email blew up shortly after you aired it too. Got a lot of very positive feedback on it. It's, just kind of taking a lighthearted look at city management and the ultimate possibilities of having a TV show focused around a city manager.
I was so stoked. We were so excited about it. I think there's so much material, right? You can't make this stuff up, as they say, because true life is stranger than fiction.
Absolutely, absolutely, and in a lot of cases, we all have a lot of interesting stories out there.
What happened with the City of Weed sitcom? Why did it go by the boards? I'm really bummed.
Well, you and most of the people that live in Weed are bummed. When this all started happening, it happened rather quickly. It was right in the middle of the pandemic when this idea got started and kind of spitballed, and had a couple producers out of Reading that were really excited about doing this, and they had connections with Netflix and Hulu and a few other streaming services. They came in, they got the blessing from the council. They went ahead and made a proof of concept, which, for those of you who don't know, a proof of concept is essentially going out and shooting like a 10-minute mini pilot, I guess you could say. And they came to town, spent a whole weekend shooting that. I was with them every step of the way. They had writers, lighting people. I mean, it was like a professional, set going on inside City Hall of Wheaton. We were pretty stoked about it, and so were a lot of the people there in the community.
Yeah, there are going to be some locals even hired on to be actors in the actual production. That was the plan.
Yeah. This was kind of going to be a low budget to get it off the ground until they got their footing there. And so they weren't going to be able to use a lot of SAG folks out there that had their SAG cards. So they were looking for a lot of non-union actors out there. And there's quite a few up in Northern California. So yeah, it was really gaining momentum. The people in town were pretty stoked because they had gone out and scouted several places to shoot. Several businesses on Main Street were really excited about it. And just, the momentum was there, and then it just kind of started petering out there. And it was, very frustrating because we were, like I said, ready, and the dates were set multiple times as when they were going to start shooting it, and they just kept pushing it back and pushing it back.
Well, I think I can speak for the literally thousands of people who listened to this podcast way back in 2023 that were all bummed and disappointed that we're not going to get to hear about Jerkowski, the wastewater plant operator.
Yeah, that was going to be, all I wanted out of the situation was a cameo to come in every couple of episodes, just to finally get to be this jerk that I had in my head the whole time that I really wanted, Bill Jerkowski sitting out the sewer plant. Nobody wants to come see him, and got a big old chip on his shoulder, but it just never happened. And they went to as far as actually having casting calls and everything else, and they had stuff lined up, and we would get really, really close, and then they would say, well, it's going to be about another 3 months and another 3 months. And finally, I just kind of, called these guys up and I said, listen, we've got a lot of people that are really excited about this project, and I don't understand. And it all comes down to one thing. It comes down to money.
Yeah.
And I had a good friend in the industry, and she actually, has a SAG card and has been in several movies, several TV shows. And she said, Tim, I know you're really excited about this, but for every one show that gets on the air, there's probably 100 that never make it, because these ideas they're expensive, and to get it up off the ground was going to take some funding. And one of the guys that was in the main production side of this thing, I don't know exactly what happened. I think he had some personal issues, and then he got tied up into the politics of Shasta County, and we all know how that goes. And it just, like I said, it was just extremely disappointing.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of expensive, for those who are just tuning in, maybe you didn't catch the very first time Tim was on the show. What you may not really understand is that he's really not truly a city manager. He's a documentarian who moonlights as a city manager to pay for his habit.
Yeah,
Making
that's it.
documentaries is expensive, right? It's
it,
expensive and time consuming affair, right?
I spent a lot of money on my documentaries, and you don't make a whole lot of money off of them, but unless you can, maybe convert one of them into a movie or something like that. But most documentarians, we do it for the
For
passion
the
of
love,
story.
for
Yeah,
the love
just
of it.
for
Yeah.
the love of storytelling, man. That's what it's all about. It's just telling some stories, and I've been very fortunate and blessed to have had a few that had some moderate success, and along the festival circuits. And actually, like I said, had one that was for a while streaming on Amazon and a few other services, Google Play, iTunes, and for
Why
folks.
being bashful? Are you talking about the one that's behind you? That's I see all the awards from. Is that the
Yeah,
Valentine? Was that the Valentine one? What's this
yeah,
right?
Brother Valentine.
Brother
Yeah,
Valentine. Yeah.
Brother Valentine was based on a true story about a murder in a small town near Oklahoma City, and it was a very uh, it wasn't a lighthearted one by any stretch. But it was a story that I think needed to be told, and it kind of wrapped up into mental health and the mental health crisis we have here in the U.S. And something that unfortunately is not getting addressed like it should, and the funding is getting cut. But these things are very important. But anyway, it was that one, and I'm actually right now have been in the last like 6 months working on turning Brother Valentine into a full book.
Nice.
It's been a labor of love, and eventually I'd love to turn that into a screenplay. But we'll see what happens. That's right now I've kind of put my documentary headset and cameras on the shelves right now, and focus more on my writing. But it's like I said, it's something that I love. I've got a couple other ideas in the can, or not only in the can, but on the shelf that someday might be in the can. Which is I've met some folks real quickly. I met a couple folks here in town that are crab fishermen, and it's an all female crew,
Well,
which
we should
I
wait.
found
Wait,
fascinating.
we're probably going to lose the audience a little bit there because
Yeah.
you are no longer in the
Oh,
city of
that's
Reed
right.
in Northern California. You
Yeah.
are now up in Brookings, which is a coastal city in Southern Oregon, right? To kind of bring the audience up
Yeah.
to speed. So
Yeah.
yeah, so you're talking about doing a story maybe about some of these crab fisher women.
Yeah, the crab fisher one. Yeah, yeah. Because when we watch those shows on A&E or whatever the most deadly catch is on, yeah, that's a when I talked to these people and I found out there was actually a group of ladies here that had their own crab boat and an all female crew. I thought, man, that is badass. I'd like to go out there and see how it goes. And yeah, that's one that I've been kicking around. There's just, like I said, and there's a couple other little quirky ones that I've thought about doing, but that's one that I've really thought would be a great story to tell. And real quickly, there was another documentary that I may be doing. I do a lot of, or a little bit of actually acting. I've been getting involved in local theater here in Brookings too, and it's been really fun. I haven't had my acting skills polished for quite some time, but just doing local community theater here. But I was actually involved in a small indie film in Weed, based on a true story, and I use that term lightly because it was based on this young man who had, quote unquote, a terminal illness, that was passionate about becoming a stand-up comedian someday. And the screenplay was written about his life. He's from the Siskiyou County area. This lady, it's a mutual friend. She had got the funding put together, and a bunch of us, rallied behind this young man. He's, I think, at the time in his maybe late 20s, early 30s, before time ran out. And he was part of the crew as well. And I took a week off of work, man, to do this thing. And long story short, at the end of the day, we found out, actually about a couple months after it was shot, that he wasn't exactly being honest with us about his disease. He
Ah,
was that was tough, man. That was tough. Yeah, we all kind of got duped into doing this.
well, now you need to do a documentary about the documentary, I guess, or something, right? I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's what the thought is, going back and interviewing all the people like myself that got duped into doing this indie film based on this poor kid that's dying, who always wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and finally his dream came true and he started getting some moderate success and doing stand-up, only to have the rug pulled out from under us to find out he wasn't terminal at all.
Oh man, to go from Brother Valentine to maybe a different Brother Valentine. I don't know. That's,
it was something. I could tell you what, there was quite a few upset people
I can
about that.
imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, earlier you said, seriously, you were talking about how you are involved in community theater, but I'm a little bit kind of offended by that statement there, Tim, because as city managers, aren't all of us kind of involved in community theater?
That's funny that you say that, Joe, because I was telling somebody recently. I said, what's amazing is, and I don't care what city you're at, but when you're getting ready to, especially go into a council, when it's council meeting day, you got to put your game face on, you got your script out, which is your agenda, and you just want to
There's
make sure.
there's electricity in the air. There's some tension. You could feel it. I mean, depending on the meeting, right?
Exactly, because you may get some wacky public comments, or you may get some wacky comments from the mayor or council about something. But yeah, I've seen some amazing things at council meetings as well. But yeah, we all have to put on our game face, and get ready to do it live in front of an audience every couple of weeks.
Not all heroes wear capes there, Tim, because I am always constantly amused when I can find city managers who are able to keep a straight face when some of the absolute
Oh my
shenanigans just
gosh.
just
Oh,
pop off at a council meeting.
oh my gosh, me too. I've had
Whether it's
to.
between a council members arguing with each other or audience members lobbing bombs at the council or just
Exactly.
just city managers themselves being verbally attacked and accosted by the elected officials or the residents. It's crazy out there.
It can be. It can be. I've had to bite my lip a couple of times during council meetings because I did not want to laugh, and sometimes I didn't want to cry. So you're getting attacked so
Well,
ferociously there.
to come full circle of crazy stories and all stuff, we are going to have a second episode, you and I, Tim, where we talk about some of those crazy stories you've experienced. Because even though the City of Weed sitcom has fallen by the wayside, you provided them with some material from some of your real life stories that was going to be used for some of the plot lines. And so we are going to unpack those in a
Yeah,
later episode, right? We're talking about the crazy stories of city manager life.
that will be awesome. That will be awesome. I can't wait to share some of those.
Yeah, but today we're going to talk about some little bit more of a intense, serious topic, and it's so serious and important to you to share that I'm going to kind of pull back the curtains a little bit for the audience. My goal as a podcast host is obviously to provide value to the city managers and public sector executives who listen to the show. And I put a lot of time and energy into trying to put a good show out there, editing the content and so forth and so on to make it a good audio experience. And there's been times when I've actually had to scrap episodes that just weren't bangers, like they just didn't hit the way I wanted it to, or I've called up a guest and be like, hey, I'm sorry, I just don't think this episode really kind of came off the way it needed to. Can we redo it? But in this is the first time that I've actually had a guest say, "Hey, Joe, um, I need to redo this one. I need a second take on that, and can we go back and give it another go?" And so you reached out to me. We had recorded a 90-minute interview, and it just didn't land. It just didn't hit the spots that you wanted to hit, right, Tim? And so you want to take another
Yeah,
crack at it because you have some pretty serious topics you want to talk about, and you want to
sure.
help these managers deal with some of the things that they're going through because you've walked a pretty tough road at times.
Yeah, Joe, I've been doing this for 25, getting ready to start my 25th year in city management. So I've seen a thing or two along the way. And yeah, that's kind of what you and I had started talking about a couple days ago when we were doing the first one. And then, yeah, I did. I called back because I felt like I was more or less just airing out a bunch of grievances about a particular council member in a particular town. And that's not really what I was trying to achieve. What I was really trying to achieve is talk about some of the issues. I'm going to just put it out there: the dirty little secrets that we carry as city managers, and the dirty little secrets are the fact that sometimes, man, we are bullied behind the scenes by some of our elected officials, and and some of them are very, very difficult people. They may not be difficult people in the eyes of the citizens sitting up on the dais up there, but behind the scenes, some of these folks are, successful business people, and they're just used to, I've had, council members that are multi millionaires. I've had council members that just drove a truck, blue collar, which is great. But it's good because that's what the great thing about, city councils is: you have a whole eclectic group of people up there making these decisions. It's not all just, there's no party affiliation involved in most city council races. But yeah, I had a little bit of an experience in my last city, and like I said, I'm not going to belabor it, but it was a situation to where after it was all said and done, I just felt like this would be a great topic, and talk about how you could just be doing incredible things within your organization and for your city, and all it takes is one person one elected that can just make your life hell, and
Yeah,
that's
and just
that's
totally destroy the chemistry or the culture of the
all the
relationship that you
momentum.
have. Yeah, all
Yeah,
that stuff, right?
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
and and the same can be said for obviously an individual staffer, right? A department head
Oh,
or
yeah,
ACM.
yeah,
I mean, it's really when you stop and think about the situation and you look at these cities that are being run and the organizations run smoothly or got a good culture.
yeah,
Man, those are really not the norm, right? I mean, I'm not saying all communities are bad or all communities are dumpster fires or anything like that. I mean, there's obviously a lot of them out there, but
yeah,
it takes a lot of luck, a lot of skill, for a city to have a good culture and to run smoothly. And a
yeah,
lot of that's dependent on a governing body that respects the role of the city manager, who respects the person, whether is actually sitting in the role, and
yeah.
also fully understands the dynamic of what their roles are and what your roles are. I mean, it's a tightrope out there.
It is, and and trying to juggle that and the stress that we carry with that can be very difficult. And I think just real quickly, if you don't mind, I'll just quickly
No.
share what
No,
happened.
well, Tim, before you go there, I'm gonna
Sure.
tell the audience, I have no idea where this conversation is gonna go right now. This might turn into a two-part episode. We're just gonna let it roll because you got a lot of stuff you want to get off your chest, and I don't want
Sure.
to hurry through it or rush through it.
Sure.
And so we're just gonna take it as it comes. Okay, Tim?
Sure. And again, I'm not here to just air all my grievances and make it sound like I'm just some poor little victim. Obviously, I've been doing this a long time, and I know what I'm doing. I've done it in 3 different states and had to learn 3 different sets of laws per state when it comes to municipal governments and so forth. But my situation in weed kind of changed in November of 22. We had an election, got 2 new council members. One of the council members is a former employee of the city of Weed, and actually his spouse worked for me. She worked in my utility billing office, and he came up quite a few times. He ran in 2020, didn't get on the council, and then he was able to run in 22 and got elected along with another new council member. When you have somebody that's a former employee, you feel like, okay, this person definitely gets local government and what it's about. But unfortunately, I was not prepared for what was getting ready to happen in this situation. And I'm just going to tell it, like it is. This guy was a bit of a bully, a bit of a tyrant, and he had an extremely fragile ego and did not like to be criticized whatsoever. And it was just very tough. I was not fully prepared with what this guy was going to be doing. And it just really turned like say some really good momentum. In November of 22, you have to remember, I just went through.
Well
Go ahead.
well,
Sure,
can I interrupt you there, Tim? Because I have the luxury of sitting through the first interview that
sure.
obviously hit the editing room floor, and you're saying you weren't prepared, but one of the things that you have not talked about in this episode, this final cut, is that prior to this individual being elected, you had had many interactions with this individual that were very positive, that you thought was gonna go very well. So
Yeah.
that kinda gives you a little bit of the context for how you were kinda thrown for a loop when this person actually got into office finally.
Yeah, yeah, it was tough, man, because I thought he and I had a really, really good chemistry. I bet you I had probably 20 different separate conversations with this individual, and most of them were face to face. And so I was actually pretty happy when he got on the council, because one of the things when you have somebody that's never been a part of local government, there is some little bit of training and lag time that goes on for
Sure.
them to be able to get their footing and understand all the the policies, the ordinances, and everything that comes along with and responsibilities of being a council
Yeah.
member, what you can and what you cannot do, and what is your role within the organization.
And is it fair to say that you had a good relationship with his wife, and therefore
Oh,
you thought maybe his wife could communicate, "Hey, there's a lot of good stuff going on with under your leadership, and the city's moving in a good direction." I mean, that's I'm sure kind of rocked you a little bit. This whole the whole
it
thing.
really did, because his spouse came to me about, I don't know, a year or two after I had been in the organization, and stopped me in my tracks one day and just said, "Hey, I want to tell you something." She said, "The whole culture in this organization has changed since you've been here. We were basically operating out of fear with the last city manager, because he was a fist pounding on the desk and a yeller and a this, that's how he pretty much every one of my department heads told me at one point he had threatened to fire them at some point. When he would just get mad, he'd bring them into the office, scream and yell at them. And that's not how I work at all, man. I'm all
Right.
about,
Right.
putting the team together and building people up, not tearing them down. And so, yeah, I was stoked, and I figured, she was telling this. And in fact, he came to my office like, a week or two before the election, and we were just, talking about city stuff and other things. We had some other common interest, and he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know you're doing a great job. My wife thinks you're doing a great job for this organization. I have no other motive other than make weed a better place to live and work." And I was like, "Hey, that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about, and that's what I'm here for." And so, yeah, I was a
Yeah.
little bit taken back. And this individual had been on my planning commission before, and he was adamantly opposed to a cannabis manufacturing facility that was going to be put there, a processing place, for edibles and all these other things. And he was opposed to it. And the city entered into a development agreement with the owner of this company. And for those who don't know, and most of you guys do that are in the business, a development agreement basically says we as the city are not going to change the rules. I mean, this guy was going out and trying to garner, I think, somewhere between 30 to $50 million to build this facility. And what you don't want to happen is, like, 2 months before you get ready to break ground, everything gets yanked out from under you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly
it
right.
freezes basically everything in place at the time that you agree to this. And he was adamantly opposed. And I had a council that voted 5-0 to approve it. So,
Did the planning commission support it, and did they override the
he,
planning
he
commission,
voted.
or was he the minority in the planning
No,
commission?
he voted against it in the planning commission. And I want to say, I believe the majority of the planning commission, I want to say, voted against it as well. Uh,
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
so the
Okay.
council, basically overturned the commission's recommendation, and to not let it happen. And the council said, no, we need these jobs. At the time, this was done in 2020. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and jobs and everything else are just paramount. As I told you before, I came
Absolutely.
into this organization. We were
You guys were nearly insolvent.
Oh
If you
my
go back and
God.
listen to episode number 8,
Yeah.
the audience, I mean, you if I recall correctly, if memory serves me correctly, because I had a similar situation to him, you got the job, and then you got there, and on your first day or virtually your first day, the mayor comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, we're virtually insolvent. We only have like $9,000 in the bank," right? Something like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. My finance director came in and broke the news to me the first.
Finance
Yeah.
director, sorry
No, no,
about that.
no, that's
Yeah, it
fine.
was my
Yeah,
mayor.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, the finance director came in and broke the news to me that after payday on Friday, we were gonna have $9,000 left in the bank, and she had a stack of checks totaling a $500,000 that she couldn't send out in payables because they would all bounce. And I'm like,
That's
and
incredible.
this is right at the beginning of the pandemic. And oh, by the way, we've spent the last 5 years fighting with Roseburg, the forest products. We have a big lumber mill in our town, and we were in the middle of a big lawsuit litigation going on, fighting over some water rights that Roseburg thought that they had and the city thought that we had. And this had been going on for 5 years, and we had spent, I think, $1.6 million. We had drained the water fund for this thing, fighting for these rights. And so, yeah, we've had all that going on. And I'm not going out and toot my own horn, but I knew we were broke, and I also knew that those water rights for us were paramount. So
Right.
yeah, I was able to go out and negotiate a deal. I went, Crystal Geyser is a big bottling company. They bottle water. Everybody knows Crystal Geyser, and they have a watering plant in Weed. And I went and talked to them, and they were able to intercede and go to Roseburg and talk to them about buying the water rights because they knew how important it was for the city to have these rights too. So they bought the water rights, I believe, for $2.3 million, sold them back to the city for 1.3, and gifted $1 million back to the city in order for us to make this deal happen.
And on top of that, the 1.3 million that you purchased them for were on a payment installment
Yeah,
plan, correct?
zero interest for 13 months or 13 years.
Incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an incredible, and I was able to negotiate. That took like, 2 or 3 months for me to get that done. And a lot of people left scratching their head. And then, by the way, a couple months later, Roseburg had to go out and get the water rights appraised because of the $1 million gift that they had gifted the city for tax purposes. Their tax attorney's like, okay, now you need to go out and get an appraisal of those water rights. The water rights, I think they came back at 4.5 million. That's what they appraised for. Yeah,
Wow.
so,
Wow.
I had that. We'd went through two major fires while I was in Weed. I mean, I literally slept on my floor two different times, making sure that our citizens were getting the services they need during some horrific wildfires. One that swept through our town and burned down 60 houses in about 20 minutes and killed two people. And it was, the worst day of my career. And I stayed up in my office sleeping in a sleeping bag for 4 or 5 nights because I wanted to make sure. And by the way, the city had no power. The transmission lines burned down as well. So luckily we had a generator, but it was very, very difficult for us to just survive. And but
Yeah.
I put my blood, sweat, and tears into that community. And honestly, I thought that's where I was going to finish my career.
Well, I think that's something I want to come back to a little bit, back to this, this obviously this horrific experience with this singular council member who you just talked about, just changing the dynamic. But I don't want that to be the
No, no, no,
focus.
I don't
Obviously,
either.
you don't want that to be a focus, and you want to focus on this. I think element, well, at least one of these elements, and this is what I want to hit you up with here is, I think that's the thing that many city managers struggle with, as far as processing and wrapping their heads around the notion or idea that you can leave your blood, sweat, and tears on the floor for a community, work your butt off, and then just you get cast aside like detritus, like just debris, as if there's nothing. This is one of the things that really frustrates me, and why I'm such a hard ass when it comes to contract negotiations, and I talk about residency requirements and the balance of power between elected officials and the executive, because it's everyone's talking about, oh, we want you to be invested in the community, to be a part of it, we're a family. But when they're wanting to get rid of you, or when someone's wanting to hang you out to dry, there it's not a family then,
No.
right? And so it's very interesting, and I know that somebody who's not a city manager who's listening to this podcast might roll their eyes, or think I'm full of shit when I say this. But I know there's a lot of city managers out there who genuinely and sincerely, and back it up with their actions and their time investment, believe that they care more about and they're more invested in the betterment of that city, that community, that organization than some of the actual elected officials that they work for.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's so hard for all of us to wrap our heads around when we've gone through that experience.
Yeah, I mean, you come in like I did. I was there for 3 months living in a camper when I first got to Weed and ended up buying a house. Like I said, right in the middle of the pandemic where everything was unknown as far as what was going to happen next. So I bought a house there. And not only did I do that, about a year after I got there, she's my ex wife now, Brandy, and I had some 1031 money. And we invested and bought a building in downtown Weed and completely refurbished it, restored it. It's an old historic building, the old Weed Bakery. It's got a 3-bed, 2-bedroom apartment up at the on the top floor of the bakery. And I bought her out, and now I'm the sole owner of that building. So here I am, own a commercial building in downtown Weed, and I look up on my council, and none of them own any commercial property in Weed. I
Right.
do, and then I'm the one that is getting obliterated behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't want to get too far ahead. So I want to kind of circle back a little bit and we can kind of touch on it as you feel
Sure,
comfortable because I'm kind of curious about the two aspects of this relationship with the new council member,
sure,
right? Because it was a 180 shift,
yeah.
and I'm kind of curious as far as can you articulate like what happened? How did things go south? One, and two, I want to come back to you being able to articulate a little bit more in detail the kind of things he was doing to undermine and
Oh my
sabotage
God,
your
yeah,
role as the
yeah.
executive
Well,
because it was egregious what he was
oh
doing.
my God. Yeah, I will talk about that. Well, the first thing is we had just went out for an RFP for trash service in town for our collections. And we had 3 companies. One was Waste Management. Then we had 2 Siskiyou County trash haulers that also placed an RFP in. Myself and a couple of the staff members, we all recommended Waste Management came in with the best RFP and what we felt was the best for the organization. But we had a local group there in Weed, small mom pop trash haulers that got very political, and the council decided to override
They
our.
want to support
Yeah,
the hometown team, right?
absolutely, which I understand. I understand.
I get it. I
Yeah,
get
you're
it.
bringing in the big boys like Waste Management to come in with their fancy, brand new trucks and all that good stuff, and people get a little intimidated. Well, they picked the locals. Well, long story short, the company when we the one that we took the contract away from that was actually just contracting with the city. We did all the billing and everything else, but we went to strictly to a franchise agreement instead, where we just collected basically a 10% franchise tax in lieu of doing all the billing and everything else. So, long story short, after 5 months, they still hadn't presented us with the necessary documents showing that they had a $100,000 surety bond put in place in case they failed.
So at this point, they've been awarded the bid by the council because the council wants to support the local company, and but 5 months after, they have not submitted the necessary requirements to meet that
Yep.
contract. And how far away at that time, roughly, are they from taking over
Oh,
the actual
that
services?
was the crazy part. So they took over before, because the prior company basically sold all his assets to this company and just washed his hands and walked away. So
Oh,
there
okay.
was no transition. It was like boom, boom. I think we had maybe less than 30 days.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was one of the things that we kept going, hey, we need that, you haven't met your bond yet. You need to, provide us the documentation showing us that you have this bond. And they kept dragging their feet and giving us all these excuses and blah, blah, blah. And unbeknownst to me, that it's a husband and wife that owns this company, and they're a fairly young couple. And this council member basically comes and says, "Oh, by the way, she's my goddaughter." And I'm like, "Your
What?
goddaughter?" He's like, "Yeah, she was my basically my." She calls him dad and calls my accounts receivable mom, and I'm like,
No
"Oh my
kidding.
god, I was not aware of this." And
Maybe that should have been disclosed maybe
yeah,
by the by
exactly.
him on the council, right?
Well, then
Because he voted for the contract, right? He voted for the bid?
it
Did he
I
did
don't
he abstain, do you
I
recall?
don't he it I think that happened the month before he swore in. So,
Oh,
which,
okay,
which
okay.
is good.
But the fallout from them not getting it's what caused a lot of the friction because you being the person who's got to enforce it is
Absolutely.
all of a sudden the bad guy now, right?
Yeah,
You're the bad
because
guy.
here's what
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to say is, let's just say they decide to, it's too stressful. They fold tent and bolt, and I don't have that $100,000 bond there to keep it afloat for 3 or 4 months until we get somebody else in there.
Yeah.
Guess whose ass is on the chopping block? It sure isn't them. It's mine.
Right.
So after five
Right.
months, I called my city attorney. He goes, let's have an executive session and talk about this. California, they're called closed sessions. We go in there, and this guy is just seething. I mean, just seething. Before we even get started, I'm not going to disclose anything that happened in there because I'm not
Sure.
allowed to. This all happened prior to the meeting. And we are sitting at the corner of this table. And he starts putting his finger in my face and saying, I don't like you. I'm never going to like you. Da, 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 da. And he kind of stands up for a second and kind of hovers over me. And the mayor had to tell him to sit down. And it was very unnerving. And I was like, good Lord. So we have the meeting. We think we've got a game plan going forward, and we're adjourning. And I said, I stopped him. And I said, hey, can we talk about this real quickly? No. And he just stormed out of there. And I was like, oh God, this is, getting off to a great start. So that was number one.
So Tim, how soon did that happen? And after sort of he was seated for after winning the election and he was seated, about how long did that happen
Like 4 or 5
afterwards?
months after that.
Yeah.
So
So during that 4 or 5 months, had you had any friction with him up to that point, or did things just sort of go south with
no,
that whole
I
deal
had
because of the personal relationship?
Well, I had something unbeknownst to me that he said I did that was highly offensive to him. A couple months into his term, I had negotiated when we had the mill fire in September 2nd, 2022. We had the mill fire come down, burn 60 houses, tore a bunch of our infrastructure up, melted our roads, melted our infrastructure.
And for the audience for the audience to understand, the city of Weed's not a large city,
No.
so losing 60 homes, an entire
Oh my
neighborhood,
God.
that's a pretty big deal for you
It
guys.
is. And I was able, myself and the public works director and our engineer came up with an engineer estimate on the high side. I said, shoot the moon, man. We don't want to leave no stone unturned. And we shot the moon and said, we're going to need at least 4.5 million just to repair the infrastructure that was destroyed. And after a couple months of negotiating, they said, done. And then they were wanting to stop it right there. And I said, no, 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 no. We are also going to be losing a lot of revenue via property tax, franchise
Right.
tax from like the trash service, from the electric companies, from the
Yep.
cable companies. We're going to lose all those franchise fees and taxes off of that. And we're going to lose
For at least a
at
year.
least, oh yeah, and property taxes and all these other things. So we retained a firm, or we're not retained it yet, but we had a firm that we had heard really good things about. And all they did is work for cities and counties. Guess what? When I talked to them before we met with the council with them, I said, you're not going to get, because they do it off a contingency, a percentage. And I said,
Yeah.
you're not going to get a penny of that 4.5 that I've already negotiated. And they're like, well, we've never done anything like that. And I said, well, we'll find somebody else then. Like, okay. And they said, let's talk.
Why should they get paid for the work you did?
Exactly.
But
That's what I said. You're not getting any of that. I already busted my butt to get that done, and you're not going to get any money for that. So what they did is back up here. So we go into a closed session and we interview them, and it's pretty much over. And after the meeting's over, this guy is very adamantly opposed to retaining them, and
the new
the new
council
council
member.
member.
The new
But the other
Yep.
four were like, yeah, let's move. Let's do it. This is no brainer. For him, he thought it was cause more friction with Roseburg, and maybe they were going to leave town because, we're suing them, or possibly pursuing litigation against them for losing all this revenue. And he was just like, I'm against this. I just don't think it's right. And all I said to him was, listen, I understand where you're coming from, but we're in a democracy here, and you have four of your other council members that are very much in favor of this, and you obviously aren't. And you're one of five. You've spoken your piece, and they've listened, and they've decided to go, ahead. He said that was one of the most disrespectful things anybody's ever said to him. And and he didn't tell me this until much later. And that he
Right.
said, from that moment, that was the moment I decided I did not like you.
How crazy is that, Tim? A random thing where you're basically just to you, it's just a matter of fact,
Yeah,
perfunctory, obligatory. Like, hey, this is how city management works. I mean, this is how government works. You're just one of five. You're not the king of five.
exactly.
And that little thing, that little statement to somebody who clearly does not understand the council manager form of government and that dynamic, you lose them, and it turns into this bitter enemy,
Yeah,
essentially.
and it was just so une
How wild!
unexpected, totally unexpected, very wild, and so, and I tried and tried to smooth things out with this guy, and he just
And the crazy part, and I'm to belabor this, the crazy part is you don't even know till months after. How, you can't come up to me like a man and say, "Hey, I'm offended by that." Or, I don't.
exactly.
Gosh,
I mean, if I offended you by saying that, come to my office and say, "Hey, man, I understand where you were coming from, but the way you said it was disrespectful." I would tell them none of that was meant to be disrespectful. Why in the
right?
hell would I tell a brand new council member, why would I be disrespectful? Somebody, one of my bosses that just got elected, I would never do that.
Well, I'll go one step further, Tim, because this is such a mind effort. Because you're saying that, but on top of the fact that hey, we've had like 20 plus interactions over the last couple years since I've been here, and we've had nothing but great interactions. And all of a sudden, you think I'm trying to torch you and offend you? Like that makes no
It made
sense.
zero sense. And what I come to find out later through all this, Joe, is this individual had a very, very fragile ego and did not take criticism well.
That's the
They
worst.
are the
That's the
worst
worst.
because they can't, accept any criticism or anything like that. And also on top of that, he felt like he needed to come in to City Hall and tell me how to do my job on a literally a daily basis because he lived right down the street from City Hall. He was retired and he came into City Hall. At first, I thought, oh, he's coming to say, talk to his wife. But then I realized that really wasn't the case. And he started little by little eroding all of my management with my staff, which was probably the worst thing any council member could do to somebody is by doing that. And the way he did it was incredible.
Yeah, let's unpack this. So you're talking about an actual elected official,
Yep.
not even the
Nope.
mayor. Although in California, the mayors are mostly just titular because you're just one of five in an equal vote, and the council members appoint the
Did you
mayor,
say
the
one of
individual
five?
individual.
You just
Yes, but
offended me. Okay.
yeah, I know.
So anyway,
But some cities, yeah, there's actually a mayor who has more power than the council members, right? But
yeah.
not in California for the
No,
most part,
it's
unless you're a charter law city or
yeah.
something. But so in this case, he's one of five. Again, offensive to say that. And this guy comes in and just starts literally. I mean literally, but not literally, but literally camping
Yeah.
out
Hours.
on city grounds, right? And
Hours.
just
And
how incredible is that?
well, I knew it was going to be a problem because one day my city clerk came to my office and she said, "You're not going to believe what he just said." And I said, "What?" She goes, "He just said, 'Hey, how would you like to be the new city manager?'" And I was like, "What?" And I said, "That is insane. You have a city manager. I'm right down the hall from you. Oh, and by the way, when he was doing all these hopping from office to office, he would never come to my office. He was just,
Of
yeah, he
course.
was going to all the different department heads. And one time I clocked him. He spent 6 hours in City Hall one day, 6 hours. And he would go from office to office to office, telling my staff how much he couldn't stand me, how much he hated me, how I wish he could figure out a way to get rid of me. And okay. And so we have ethics and protocol guidelines that strictly prohibit that. And I want to talk about that a little
Is
bit
this
too.
is this part of your city
Yeah.
ordinances or city charter?
Yeah.
Or okay,
I
okay.
put, I helped put this in place when I first got there. Well, actually, I asked my city attorney to help me out because I did that in Durant as well and a couple other cities that I've worked for because I think it's important for local electeds to understand what their role is and what they
And if you've listened to episode 8, you will understand why he might have did something like that in Durant.
exactly of all the places that she didn't even She didn't care about ethics or protocol. She'll tell you right to your face. But no, he just continually broke protocol. One of the things that talked into ethics and protocol is like, thou shalt not come to city hall and tie up staff time when they're trying to do their
Yeah,
job, and thou shalt not go and undermine the city manager or other staff members or give directives. And he was so insistent, and through this whole process, he did not like the fire chief, and for whatever reason, he had, his reasons, I guess, and he was pressuring me a bunch to quote unquote do something about him, which I knew what he was talking about. He wanted me to fire him, and I
sure.
had no reason to fire him.
And to give the audience some context, since you left and an interim had replaced you or succeeded you, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fire chief was subsequently fired by that interim, correct?
Yep, absolutely. And guess what? Now the city's getting sued. Yeah, because this council member also, I believe, said at a council meeting once about, he made some remark about, I believe, about the fire chief's age, and wanted younger firefighters to make more money and this and that. So they hired an interim after I left, and I believe it was the last week. In California, you can work, I think it's 900, it's either 920 or 960 hours a
960
960 a
for
year
a
for a
retiree. Yeah.
retiree. This guy was quickly approaching his 960 limit. And the last week he was there, he fired the fire chief for management and philosophical differences. The fire chief called me and he goes, "You're not."
With the outgoing interim, right? Because what kind of differences can you have with the guy who's not going to be there the next day?
Exactly. So I'm like, what the hell are you guys doing? And I knew they were going to get sued, and now they are getting sued. And part of me, it says rightfully so. You guys, that would have never happened on my watch. I would not have. And this guy's pretty close to retirement. And I'm just like, just let
Yeah.
him retire. That sometimes you just got to wait it out. But it's just crazy. That's the kind of shenanigans that go on.
Can you articulate any other sort of things that he did or how your staff responded to it? Because the staff gets put in such
Oh,
a no man's
yeah.
land. They don't know what to do, right? Because first of all, it's just one member of the council. They don't know if that member of the council has two other votes or is able going to get two other votes at some point in time. Because
Yeah.
they obviously don't want to alienate a council member who's on the warpath to get rid of a city manager. But at the same time, I'm assuming based on what you said, they were loyal to you and they supported you and they liked what you're doing as far as change. I mean, hell, his own wife had told you that you were doing a bang up job at one
Yeah.
point. So it's like they're in this really precarious position of trying to serve two masters when they should only be serving one master.
Yeah. And when I've shared this with a few people that are in the private sector, this is what I tell them. Imagine you have 5 bosses, first of all, and they all have 5 different ways of things they like done, and 5 different ways of communicating with them that you have to, keep up with.
Yeah,
Not only do you have that, but let's just say 1 or 2 of them start going to your supervisors and your department heads and telling them what a piece of crap you are. And they're looking every which way to get you fired or to force you to resign or something. And how would you like to go to work every single day knowing that that's on the plate? And that's what I had to deal with for about
terrible.
18 months with this guy. And I was just, it was very difficult because it caused a little bit of a division. I'll just say right now, it caused a division among the staff department heads that had known this guy for a long time, worked with him or whatever. And they weren't exactly loyal to him to a degree, but they definitely, it caused them to lose some respect for, what my authority is in the organization as an
Sure.
administrator.
One, we'll go one step further, Tim, because if you got some department heads who see that as a weakness in the organizational hierarchy chain of command, and they can seize that opportunity to maybe undermine you or maneuver some way to get into the good graces or
Hmm.
benefit themselves, or
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm speaking just hypothetical because I don't know the ins and outs of the city of Weed, but to give you an example, if you got a city council member going around and it's making clear that they want a fire chief fired or the city manager fired, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see how maybe an ACM or an assistant chief or somebody else might try to manipulate the situation to their advantage. It's very precarious. And, I've talked about this at length in numerous different contexts, but when you're a city manager in this day and age, your reputation is your currency. And so it has never been easier for that reputation to get destroyed or severely damaged than it is today by virtue of the social media, the way we
Oh
communicate,
my
the way
God.
information is disseminated in such speed.
Yeah.
And so it's a very, very dangerous situation for a city manager. And I would argue that if you're in that situation, you have to make some really serious decision making, like serious analysis, like, hey, does it make sense to really fight this battle, or do I just need to like cut my losses and punch out of here, because you're trying to minimize that risk to your potential career. Because the other thing that's fascinating about the current climate with the greater politicization of the local government level, right, is, and I've been in that world a little bit, so I can see it very clearly from my past experiences, is the weaponization of politics at the local level now has created this environment where city managers are collateral damage in these political wars, in the sense that, hey, if I'm a city council member and I want things done a certain way because I'm trying to appeal to the social media, masses, or my supporters, or the clickbait, or just the whatever it is,
Yep.
right? It's not hard to basically see you as not a human being, and as just sort of a puzzle piece or a game piece to get knocked off the board. And it can get very personal. You can get manufactured Machiavellian schemes and smear campaigns. And so when you're a city manager dealing with this precarious situation, even if it's just one individual, right, just, yeah, you might say, oh, it's just one individual, they don't have 3 votes, that's just one council member. That council member can, one, convince others to come onto their side and get the votes at one point. Two, he might convince the other ones just to get rid of you because of this the headache, and they don't want to deal with. It's easier to avoid conflict with this rabble rousing, cantankerous individual in the council. Or even worse, he might be successful in getting individuals to plant seeds or smear you, or all these different political games where your reputation and your support is eroded by your governing body and staff. So that's a long way of saying that if you are in this situation, you really have to think long and hard about ejecting sooner rather than later, to do damage control on the future, because you don't know where that's going to go.
No. And, with an organization as small as what I had there in Weed, it did. It caused a split, a divide among my staff as well, because of all the respect that was lost because of, this one individual and him going on this tirade for a good 18 months. And it was very disappointing. And one, yeah,
Sorry to step on you, Tim, but don't forget, audience, you're talking about a council member who used to work for that city, and you had, and surely had personal relationships with many of the
yeah,
staff.
he did, and I'm probably still does to this day. That's what made it very difficult. And once he made that announcement to the city clerk about, hey, how would you like to be the city manager? That kind of planted a seed, and that seed just kept growing and growing and growing. And I won't say who, but that department head's head just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it caused a lot of tension, to the point where I had a staff meeting and I just said, listen, I don't give a crap what you're being told by the council individually. I am the administrator of this organization. I am the city manager. I'm not trying to pull some card of like, that's not typically who I am, but I had to remind them. It's just like, just because you have one council member that's on this warpath, be careful about jumping on his bandwagon and
Exactly
doing
right.
that, because when the smoke clears and everything's said and done, you're going to be known as the one that was instigating and perpetuating and keeping the fire and the flame stoked, as opposed to just staying out of it and not doing it. But no, that didn't happen. We had that happen there, and
Yeah.
it was really, really disappointing.
I want to finish up this line of questioning for the first part of this
Sure.
episode, then we'll go to a part two,
Sure.
Tim. But I want to finish up this a part of the conversation, so we can kind of button up the weed dynamic, and then move on to maybe more of a macro kind of
Sure. That's
conversation
what,
about
yeah,
these
that'd be
issues.
great.
Okay. Yeah, and so my big thing is can we talk a little bit more about the dynamic between the other 4 council members and this council member, and your relationship, and sort of like maybe what you did or you could have done
Yeah.
better to try to communicate with the council and get your support, because you weren't fired from the city of
No.
Weed. You voluntarily left, and you basically said, hey, I'm tired of putting up with this nonsense, even though I have a majority support among the council. And maybe for the reasons I just articulated a few minutes ago when I was talking about all the different perils that you can go through if you keep yourself in that situation and try to fight the good fight. So, I mean, you left on your own free will. Can you articulate what that dynamic was like between you and the governing body that generally supported you in the direction the city was going, and why they allowed this individual to destroy the culture and the good work that was going on?
That's the $1,000,000 question, Joe. I had it to a point at one point when he had the big blow up and got in my face. The next day, the mayor came to me and said, "Oh, by the way, he's not allowed to come to your office anymore without an escort or a witness or somebody with him." And I'm like, "Really?" I got so I mean, so basically says because we don't trust him as far as being in the office with you. This guy had a pretty rambunctious temper. He got
Yeah,
he I think it was in the summer of 23. He came off this trail near our community college that we have there in Weed, got into some sort of verbal altercation with somebody coming off the trail. And by the way, he would take his dogs with him on the trail, which were prohibited, but he didn't give a crap. And
of
of
course.
course not. So he got into this verbal altercation, which turned into a shoving match, which turned into him drawing a gun on somebody, and 911 was called, and they
Wow.
said, "Hey, this is right on the edge of a college. He's drawn a gun on somebody," and da 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 da. So our police show up. Well, he takes off, goes to his house, and then the police are trying to figure out, well, who the hell was pulling the gun, and it was a big stir in the community. Well, he gets home, calls the police station, said, "Hey, if anybody calls, it was me. I'm the one that pulled the gun." Well, they never even went. I didn't
Are
find
you
this out until
serious?
much later. They didn't even go interview him about the incident. The guy that he pulled the gun on, I was told later, was an Iraq war vet that had a lot of PTSD issues, and he didn't want to get knee deep into it as well. He just wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah.
let it all go and put it behind him. But
That's
that's the
insane.
kind of caliber that this individual was, and that's why the mayor wanted somebody to escort him to my office because he didn't trust this guy.
So they understood that this guy was a loose cannon and
Yeah,
that he was a vocal minority voice on the council, but yet they didn't seem to sort of fully wrap their head around the impact or what impact this was having on you as a city
no.
manager and your level of happiness and whatnot, right? Did you have an opportunity to talk to him, or do you think maybe you just didn't vocalize it enough? Maybe you just said, "Hey, I'm a man, I can handle it.
Yeah.
I'm just." Can you walk me through like what you sort of communicated with your governing body about this individual and what requests, if any, you made of them?
Well, they all witnessed, his temper, his flare-ups, all these things. And when I would discuss it with them, they would kind of poo-poo it off as, he's got a temper, he's a hothead, he's just all talk. And I'm like, all talk. Tell that to the guy he pointed a gun at a couple days
Right.
ago. So these are the things that, they knew it. And looking back now, there were a few things I wish I had done, but I'm not sure if it would have
It would
mattered.
have changed
It would have
anything.
changed anything because I think
What do you wish you what do you I'm curious, what do you wish you would have done differently?
we had
Even if it might not have changed the result, I'm kinda curious.
Well, we did have an ethics and protocol policy and procedures, and I wish I'd filed some ethics complaints on him. I did on my way out the door. I filed numerous ethics complaints against him, to which this day I've not heard a single peep about. And on my way out the door,
Are those filed at the local level, or in California, do you file those with the FPPC
no, these were
or
local level because they were violation
okay,
of local policy and the
okay.
local city. So yeah, that's still to be determined. And this is the other thing I was going to tell any of you newbies out there that are coming into this career field. And by the way, I pulled out the stats, Joe. We have 340 million people in this country. We have a million police officers, 1.2 million firefighters. There's only 3,500 city managers in the United States. So we are a teeny weeny microcosm of what makes up the population out here. And for you guys that are coming into this and you're thinking, I want to be one of the 3,500, I want you to take this and listen to me. The city attorney is not your buddy. He's not your friend. He's
Amen,
not your
amen.
ally. And even though he may pat you on the back, and even though you recommended his firm be the one that the city take, he is not your friend because his vested interest in that organization is to keep his firm gainfully employed. And he's not going to do that by siding with the city manager. He's going to do that by
Yep.
siding with the council. And the way he drew up this ethics and protocol for the council was, and now that I look back, but I didn't think at the time it was that big of a deal, is none of the findings the council has to have, once those things are turned in. I think the mayor and the mayor pro tem review it, then they take it to the council, and then they can ask the individual that's got the complaint against them questions and blah, blah, blah. But guess what? That's all sealed up, put away, not for public knowledge.
Are you
Dead
serious?
serious. And so, yeah, yeah. So after filing those complaints against him, I've requested, follow up correspondence saying what happened as a result of my ethics complaints, and it was crickets. And I said, we don't have,
Uh,
we're not at liberty to tell you. It's in the ethics that, basically there's like one little sentence saying it all stays in house. So you as a citizen, or you as an employee, or you as a city manager can file an ethics complaint against a council member and never know what happened as a result of that,
yeah.
unless there's like a public censure or something like that. And what he was doing, I thought, at a minimum, he should have been, given a censure for all the stuff that he was doing. But that didn't take place either. So anyway, that's the one little nugget I want all you guys that are, up and comers wanting to get into this. When you go work for the organization, please remember that city attorney's there primarily. He's there for the citizens and the city, but you are at the bottom of the list as far as the things that he's there for.
I could go on so many rants about city attorneys. I mean, I'm not saying they're all bad or
No,
anything like that. I
no,
think they're
I've had some
necessary to
good ones.
have, but there's just so much territory that needs to be covered on city attorneys and that dynamic when it comes to the council dynamic, the manager dynamic. I have a lot of thoughts on compensation for city attorneys and their hourly rate
Oh my
compared to what city
God.
managers make, and the level of risk and scrutiny they face and accountability compared to what city managers have to endure. It's laughable to me that I don't want to go on a rant, but it's just laughable to me that city attorneys basically can have carte blanche, nobody questions anything that they do. They're just allowed to kind of exist in their own sort of world. But when it comes to city managers, it's so easy a caveman can do it. We're interchangeable cogs in a machine. Apparently your city clerk can just be tapped in to do the job, right? Just when it's just laughable. It really annoys me. But I would end this part one of this conversation with you, Tim, on this following note, and that is for the city council members out there, who are elected officials who are listening. Because I do have some who are tuned in, and this is also for the city managers. I'll get to the city manager angle in a second. But if you are a elected official and you're happy and really excited about the work that your city manager is doing, and you see that you have a one or two members of the governing body who are really just going after that manager and bullying them and trying to just undermine them and undermine their authority and sabotage what they're doing, you have an obligation to speak out and publicly support your city manager and condemn that behavior. It is not the city manager's job to police members of the council and publicly blast them or call them out. And at the end of the day, if you really like what your city manager is doing and you don't want that city manager to leave and go to greener pastures where they're going to find the respectful professional treatment that they deserve, then do something about it. Say something, because turnovers are very costly to an organization. I mean, Weed right now is literally looking for a city manager. They've been going through the interim. This can't be healthy for the organization. And to have one individual go in and disrupt all that, it's a shame. And I would say too, for the city managers out there, and we're going to maybe venture this, we're going to venture into this in part two a little bit, but you are public sector executives. You have an obligation to cultivate and develop that relationship with your elected officials to help build that. And you should also be speaking up and advocating on behalf of yourself and communicating to these elected officials like, hey, this is unacceptable behavior and you should come out and do something about it. You need to support me as your city manager. It's very often that city managers will go out and take all the bullets and the blame and heap all the scorn on me as a city manager who runs interference for the governing body, right? In fact, I've had conversations with my elected officials and I'll say, hey, listen, I don't mind being the bad guy on this issue publicly if you want me to be. As long as you back my play in closed session or privately and you stand by me, I don't care if you want to, pass it on to me or say that's the city manager's decision or the city manager's choice or he made that decision or whatever. But as long as you have my back, I'm okay with that. I mean, that is part of the relationship that you have in the council manager form of government, is understanding the roles, what we're here to do, and the symbiotic give and take, supporting each other relationship. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's dead on, because if you don't, as a council member, guess what's going to happen? Like what happened in Durant. Durant is on their ninth either city manager or interim manager in 9 years. So
Incredible.
that's what's going to happen to you. So you're going to spend more of your time like Weed is right now looking for a city manager. And guess what? And it's already the chirping's already happened in my ear, is when a finalist knows that he's down to the final two or three, guess who he's going to call and ask about, is this a quality organization? He's going to pick up the phone, and it's already happened. It's already happened in Weed, where they're going to pick up the phone and call. And as long as that individual is still on that council, I cannot in any good faith do that to my brothers and sisters out there that are
Amen.
looking to do it. Because if I do, then I'm setting them up for failure, and I don't want to do that.
And an extension of that, and not to toot my own horn, but just this is the reality, because of my platform, because of my following, because of my reputation, because of how well known I am as the podcast and LinkedIn and AAME. Tim, I have people reach out to me all the time and say, hey, do you know anything about this community? Do you know anything about this vacancy? Do you know anything about any issues going on here? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I literally had an individual who's reached out to me about the city of Weed. And I said, hey, you might want to think twice on that one.
Yep.
And two, you might want to reach out to Tim Rundel, because he might have some thoughts for you.
Yep. It is. I mean,
we got to protect our own. We got to protect ourselves. No one else is going to do it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Oh, man. All right. Well, this is part one. Thank you, Tim, for the invigorating discussion. We're going to come back and have a little bit more of a macro level conversation about this stuff. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and public sector executives. If you enjoyed the content, please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice, especially those Apple, Spotify users. If you have not hit that follow or subscribe button on your platform of choice, please do so you don't miss an episode. Stay tuned for our next part 2 episode with Tim. It's going to be a great one. And then also at a later date, I'm going to release a third episode with Tim, where we talked about some of the crazy stories he's endured as a city manager and assistant city manager in Oklahoma, California, but not Brookings yet.
They don't qualify yet.
Catch you next week.